This tutorial is for Joji Locatelli's Storm Shawl. It's a gorgeous and fun shawl, both to knit and to wear. Here it is modeled by the gorgeous and fun Leonora. You can see it looks great in several different styles. You can get the pattern on Ravelry and will need fingering weight yarn and size 7 needles. I'm using 2 yarns, both by Art Yarns, Merino Cloud for the bulk of the shawl and Beaded Silk Light for the drop stitches. The shawl uses some fun, repetitive techniques demonstrated in this video. There are titles on each section to help you fast forward or rewind to the section you're looking for.
The pattern starts with a garter tab. This is a popular technique for triangular and crescent-shaped shawls. It forms a nice base to then expand out from as you pick up stitches. I'm going to demonstrate with chunky yarn so you can better see how it comes together. If you have them handy, it's nice to do this with straight needles, giving you one less moving part to contend with. After you've knit your garter tab, according to the pattern instructions, just knit across the top and then pick up stitches along the side and bottom of the tab. I'm going to do this with just one needle. Dip in, wrap around, and pull the yarn through. Dip in, wrap around, and pull the yarn through. I like to dip in between the garter ridges. Most importantly, make sure you're evenly spacing your stitches and picking up the number the pattern calls for along the side and on the end. Dip in, wrap around, and pull it through. It gets a little trickier and tighter at the bottom as you pick up along the cast-on edge and by the slip knot. Keep in mind this is a very small part of your shawl and it's going to get absorbed by the bulk of the shawl. It's a bit forgiving, so no need to be overly perfectionistic. However, if you aren't happy with one of your pickup spots, it is easy to undo one stitch and then just pick up in a better spot. I'm going to pick up the last corner here. Now we have completed the garter tab, which will serve as a nice base for expanding the shawl. It's a little more tedious with a thinner yarn as it's not as stable of a base. However, it works the same way. Just dip in, wrap around, and pull it through. Spacing the stitches out nicely, making sure you pick up the correct number of stitches across the side and the bottom of the tab. Dip in, wrap around, and pull it through. Now we have a nice little tab that we can expand on from here. As you start increasing your shawl, it's very helpful to put a split ring marker on the front side of your work. This will quickly let you know whether you are working on the front side or the back side of the shawl. The slip stitch edge technique gives the edge of your shawl a nice smooth appearance. You are essentially elongating the edge stitch by slipping it when it is the first stitch and only knitting it on the flip side when it is the last stitch. It's important to slip this stitch purlwise with the yarn in front and then bring the yarn between the needles to the back for your next knit stitch. This prevents the edge stitch from getting strangled when you knit the next stitch. Knit front back is a simple way to increase the stitches in your shawl. You knit into the front of the stitch, don't drop it off, flip your needle around to the back, and knit into the back of the stitch. You've now put 2 stitches into one. Knit into the front, flip it around, and knit into the back, increasing your stitch count by 1. Knit into the front, flip around, and knit into the back. And that's increasing with knit front back. The decorative band here is the drop stitch band. It gives the shawl a unique fancy look. I'm using a beaded yarn for this section. If you like, it is a fun place to use a different color yarn. To make these drop stitches, you add 3 extra wraps to each stitch. So you knit in, wrap around 4 times, 3 extra times, and pull those wraps through your stitch.
knit in, wrap around 4 times, and pull those wraps through your stitch. When we flip over and resolve these stitches on the back side, we knit into the stitch and let those 3 extra wraps fall off our needle. Knit in, let the extra wraps fall off the needle. Knit in, and let the wraps fall off your needle. This creates the decorative dropped stitch band. Now we're going to talk about the wedge, which uses wraps and turns. Short rows are often intimidating, but are actually quite simple. You can see here we've knit along the bottom full rows, but then we're making a short row where we stop a quarter of the way and go back, make a short row stopping halfway and turning back, and then making a last short row going 3/4 of the way, doing a wrap and turn, and going back. So this makes a wedge that has more rows on the left side than on the right. This does create a little hole in the work where you do the wrap and turn. However, especially in garter stitch, this gets absorbed very nicely and is really not noticeable in your work at all. So how you do this is you knit to the place in the pattern that calls for a wrap and turn. Here we are. So we slip a stitch from your left needle to the right, bring the yarn to the front of the work, and then slip the stitch back to the left needle. This creates a little noose around that stitch. Now we flip it over. We have that little noose, and we just knit back along the short row. Now when we get to the other side, we can see this is where we have our wrap and turn. Notice it has 2 wraps around that stitch. So to resolve that wrap and turn, we just knit right up to it, noting when we get there, the 2 wraps around the stitch, knit it, and then just carry on. It is important to note that that's where the wrap and turn was, because your pattern will likely say knit X stitches past that wrap and turn. So here it is in the thinner yarn. Slip the stitch, bring the yarn to the front, slip the stitch back to the left needle, flip over your work, whoops, put that stitch back on there. Now you've got this little noose around your stitch, and you're ready to continue knitting back along your short row. It is helpful at this point to flip your work over, find that double wrap, and put a marker through it so that when you're on the other side knitting, ready to resolve it, you'll more easily see it. Then just continue on going back along your short row. Now here we are on the other side, ready to resolve our wrap and turns. You can see we're getting close to it because we see that marker. As we get there, we just knit the stitch as normal, noticing you really could miss this if you didn't put that marker there. Now we're just going to take off this marker and continue on with whatever the pattern says, like X stitches past the wrap and turn to make your next short row. Now we're going to talk about the eyelet rows. These are yarn overs offset by knit 2 togethers to make these decorative little holes in our work. They're very easy to do. You just knit to the place where you want to make your yarn over, pull your yarn to the front of your work, and knit your next stitch. Now you can see this created a yarn over without an attached stitch below it, making a little hole in your work. So we pull our yarn to the front and knit our next stitch as normal, knitting with the yarn in the front instead of as we normally do with the yarn in the back, making this little hole.
Now we're going to offset those yarn over stitches with some knit 2 togethers. Super easy, just knit 2 stitches together instead of knitting a single stitch, decreasing your stitch count by 1 each time.
Now we're going to do the decorative picot bind off. We insert our needle between our last 2 stitches and do a cable cast on by wrapping the yarn around the needle, pulling it through those stitches, and putting it back onto our needle. Wrapping the yarn, pulling it through, and putting that new stitch onto the needle. Now we're just going to do our regular cast off, which starts off with the knit 2, and then cast 1 off, and now we'll continue with just knit 1, cast 1 off, knit 1, cast 1 off. You continue in this manner according to your pattern's directions, casting off the number of stitches that it calls for. And then on your last one, you just slip that back and start the process all over again. So insert your needle, wrap it, pull it through, and put on a new stitch. Insert your needle, wrap it, pull it through, put your new stitch on, and now you're ready to cast off again, starting with knit 2, cast 1 off, and now continue knit 1, cast 1 off, knit 1, cast 1 off, knit 1, cast 1 off, casting off the number of stitches that your pattern calls for, and then starting it all over again.
Making sure to slip that last stitch back on your needle before you start again. The picot bind off, a gorgeous ending to a gorgeous shawl. Now you're ready to weave in your ends and block the shawl to really show off the beautiful detailing.
I hope this tutorial has been helpful. If so, please like it and subscribe for more Knitting Whimsy tutorials.